picture this, the year 1603.
Okay.
Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen. She's just died.
Right.
After ruling England for 44 years.
Wow.
Imagine the whispers.
Yeah.
The uncertainty in the
A
air.
long reign.
England's on edge. It's a moment full of, well, trepidation, but also hope.
Right.
It's a real turning point.
Yeah.
And that's where we're diving in today.
Okay.
Right into the transition from the Tudors to the Stuarts.
It's a fascinating period. It often gets overshadowed by, the reigns of Henry VIII or Elizabeth.
Right.
But it's so crucial for understanding 17th century Britain.
Absolutely. And to help us navigate this, we have with us a leading expert on early modern British history.
Wonderful.
Professor Susan Doran.
Yes.
We'll be looking at insights from her conversation with Professor Susanna Lipscomb
Okay.
on the Not Just the Tudors podcast.
Right.
And her book, From Tudor to Stuart, The Regime Change, from Elizabeth I to James I.
Professor Doran really digs deep into the sources. She challenges those traditional narratives about James's succession.
It's amazing, isn't it,
Yeah.
how much we just sort of accept
Yeah.
as the story of history
Yes.
until someone like Professor Doran comes along and sort of
Right.
shakes things up.
Mm-hmm.
So Elizabeth I is dead, no clear successor.
Yeah.
What was the mood like in England at the time?
You have to remember that Elizabeth had been queen for most people's entire lives.
Right.
I mean, she was a symbol of stability
Right.
and continuity.
Of course.
So her death created this wave of anxiety.
I can only imagine. So did everyone just assume James of Scotland would take over?
Not necessarily.
Oh, wait.
While James was the closest relative and
Yeah.
had been, sort of positioning himself as the heir,
Mm.
there were other potential claimants.
Right. So real uncertainty.
Absolutely. Professor Doran describes it as a time of intense nervousness,
Yeah.
rumors and speculations swirling around the court,
Oh, wow.
fears of civil war, foreign intervention. People
Yeah.
were really worried.
Yeah. And amidst all of this,
Yes.
there's this curious silence from some of the big writers of the time.
Right.
Shakespeare, Johnson.
Yeah.
No elegies for Elizabeth.
It is strange.
It seems very odd for such a major figure.
Yeah. It's a silence that speaks volumes.
What were they really feeling?
Yeah, were they hesitant to express their true feelings
Right.
until the political landscape was a bit clearer?
Mm.
Or did they maybe harbor some hope for change?
Right. A new monarch.
Yeah, Professor Doran leaves us pondering.
Yeah. It's like everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see
Let's go.
what would happen. The public reaction, though, to her death
Yes.
must have been much more visible.
Professor Doran paints this vivid picture of Elizabeth's funeral procession.
Okay.
200,000 people lining the streets,
Yeah.
many in tears, a real sense of collective grief.
I mean, this was a monarch who had reigned for their entire lives.
Yeah.
This was the end of an era.
It is a powerful reminder that, these events weren't just abstract transitions,
Right.
but they were experienced by real people who
Yeah.
felt this profound sense of loss and uncertainty.
Right. But not everyone was overcome with grief.
No, that's true.
Yeah.
Some saw Elizabeth's death as a relief,
Okay.
perhaps feeling she'd become too old
Right.
and inflexible in her later years.
Okay. So a real mix of emotions,
Yes.
sadness, fear,
Yeah.
and maybe even a bit of anticipation
Yeah.
for what this new ruler might bring.
Right.
And into this complex emotional landscape
Yeah.
steps James I,
Yes.
the first Stuart king of England.
The first Stuart king.
But to really understand him, we need to look at his experiences in Scotland.
Yes, that's right. James had been king of Scotland since he was a baby,
Yeah.
and his time there was anything but peaceful.
Man.
He faced constant challenges from powerful nobles and the very, very staunchly Presbyterian church,
Okay.
both determined to limit his authority
Right.
and impose their own will.
So not a smooth ride for him at all.
Yeah.
How did he handle these challenges?
Well, what's fascinating is that James became incredibly skilled
Oh, all right.
at navigating these treacherous waters.
Yeah.
He learned to negotiate to compromise,
Right.
and when necessary, outmaneuver his opponents.
Right.
He was determined to be a strong monarch, and he wasn't afraid to use whatever means necessary
Right.
to assert his power.
That sounds like good practice
Yes.
for being king of England.
Yes, indeed.
So he learned a lot from that Scottish experience.
Mm-hmm.
But this raises a question about his claim to the English throne.
Right.
Was he really the rightful heir, or...
Well, James certainly presented himself as the rightful heir,
Right.
emphasizing his lineage back to Henry VII.
Of course. Oh.
However, Professor Doran points out
Oh.
that his claim was actually contested.
Okay.
There were other potential claimants
Mhm.
with ties to the Tudor dynasty,
Right.
and some viewed James's accession as more of an election,
Oh.
carefully orchestrated by the Privy Council.
So even though he was crowned king,
Yeah.
still these lingering questions about
Absolutely.
the legitimacy of his claim. This smooth transition is starting to sound a bit more messy
Yes.
than maybe the history books tell us. And what about the England he inherited? Was it
Wow.
stable and prosperous?
Let's just say that Queen Elizabeth didn't leave the tidiest house in order.
Uh-oh.
Hmm.
What do you mean by that? What were the problems?
Well, first, there was a financial situation.
Okay.
That long and costly war with Spain had
Right.
drained the royal treasury.
Mhm.
And on top of that, England was still grappling with a devastating famine
Right.
and an outbreak of plague.
They did.
The economy was really struggling,
Yeah.
and there was widespread poverty.
So, not the best time to be taking over.
Not the best time. And then, to make matters worse, there was this growing religious discontent.
Okay. The Catholics, I imagine, were hoping for better treatment under James.
Yes, they were hoping for a more tolerant approach
Right.
than they had experienced under Elizabeth.
His wife was Catholic, wasn't she?
His wife, Anna of Denmark, was rumored to have Catholic sympathies.
Okay, so that would create some tension.
Hmm.
And what about the Puritans?
The Puritans were a growing force within the Church of England,
Right.
and they wanted to purify the church
Yes.
of what they saw as popish elements.
Okay.
They hoped that James, with his Calvinist upbringing,
Right.
would be receptive to their demands.
So James is stepping into a religious powder keg.
Yes, he is.
Both sides with high hopes,
Yeah.
but very different visions for the future.
Yes.
All of this against a backdrop of economic hardship
Yes.
and political uncertainty.
Absolutely.
Sounds like James had his work cut out for him.
He certainly did. And as we'll see, the challenges he faced in those early years only intensified.
Oh, dear.
His reign progressed.
Welcome back. Last time we left James inheriting a kingdom
Yes.
full of challenges.
Right.
Depleted treasury, religious discontent, lingering questions about his legitimacy.
Yeah.
Tough first day on the job.
It really is. And it's fascinating how James, having sort of learned to be this shrewd political operator in Scotland,
Right.
tries to navigate all these competing interests.
Yeah.
Professor Doran really highlights this balancing act in her book.
So let's look at the specifics.
Hmm.
How did James approach this religious tension
Well,
between the Catholics and the Puritans?
mhm.
I'm curious, did his experience in Scotland dealing with the Presbyterian Church influence his actions?
Well, initially, both Catholics and Puritans, they had high hopes for James.
Okay.
Catholics were encouraged by, rumors of his wife's conversion
Right.
and his peace attempts with Spain.
Mm-hmm.
They hoped for a more tolerant approach than they got with Elizabeth.
And the Puritans looking at his Calvinist background?
Exactly. They were looking to his Calvinist background
Yeah.
and his past support for some Puritan figures,
Right.
hoping for more significant reforms within the church.
So he's keeping everyone guessing.
Yes. James, always the pragmatist,
Yeah.
played this cautious game,
Okay.
didn't fully commit to either side, kept this strategic ambiguity.
But that couldn't last forever, could it?
It couldn't. And a really pivotal event
Yeah.
that dramatically shifted the landscape was the gunpowder plot.
Ah, yes. 1605.
The plot to blow up Parliament.
Yes.
It's a story that still, I think, captures our imagination.
It really does.
All these centuries later.
It was such a shocking event.
Yeah.
I mean, it sent these ripples of fear and paranoia
Right.
through England.
Yeah.
A group of Catholic conspirators, frustrated by James's failure to grant more religious freedom,
Right.
planned to kill him
Wow.
and install a Catholic monarch.
I mean, it's hard to overstate the impact of this. The gunpowder plot really shattered any hopes of tolerance.
It really did.
Yeah.
It fueled anti-Catholic sentiment,
Yeah.
led to harsher laws and restrictions.
Right. Professor Doran argues that while James himself might not have been as vehemently anti-Catholic as some of his advisors,
Yes.
he was forced to adopt this stricter stance
yeah.
for political survival. So even though there were fewer executions of Catholics under James,
than under Elizabeth.
Right.
This was more about pragmatism
yes,
than actual tolerance.
absolutely, he couldn't afford to appear soft on Catholicism after such a brazen attack.
Right. And as for the Puritans,
Yes.
James wasn't much more accommodating to their demands either, was he?
No, not really.
Yeah.
I mean, they were looking for more radical changes to the church.
Right, like getting rid of bishops,
Yeah.
simplifying ceremonies.
Yeah, exactly.
Did he go for that?
Not at all. He was a staunch believer in the importance of a unified church.
Right.
He saw the Puritans as a threat to that unity.
Yeah.
His famous declaration, "No bishop, no king,"
Right.
highlighting his belief that that church hierarchy
Yeah.
was essential for upholding his own authority.
So clamp down on Puritan dissent as well.
Yes, and Professor Doran makes this really surprising point here.
Okay.
She highlights that the biggest purge of Puritan ministers
Really?
actually happened under James, not Elizabeth.
Wow. So it really challenges that traditional view
Yes.
of James as this more tolerant ruler.
Right.
So both Catholics and Puritans disappointed.
It seems that way, yes. They both end up disappointed with James.
Yeah.
He talks about this middle ground, but ultimately he wasn't willing to deviate much from the existing religious order.
Right. His priority was stability control, and he saw religious uniformity as key to that.
Yes, and one way he sought to enforce that uniformity
Yeah.
was through the commissioning of a new Bible translation,
Right. The King James Bible.
the King James Bible.
A book that has had such a profound impact
It really has.
on English language and culture.
Yes.
It was more than just a scholarly endeavor, though, wasn't
But
it?
much more. James was deeply dissatisfied with the Geneva Bible,
Right.
which was a popular translation at the time.
Correct.
He found the annotations often criticizing monarchical authority,
Right.
subversive,
He wouldn't want that.
no, and dangerous.
So what did he want from this new translation?
He wanted a Bible that reinforced his view
Right.
on the divine right of kings
Mhm.
and the importance of a unified church.
Under his authority.
Exactly. It was a way to standardize religious practice
Yeah.
and combat these dissenting voices of Catholics and Puritans.
So in a sense, the King James Bible, even though it's become this revered text,
Yeah.
was a political tool
Was.
used to consolidate his power.
Yes. It's amazing how much context is often missing
Yeah.
when we learn about these historical artifacts.
Yeah, we forget that these seemingly timeless objects
Right.
have these complex backstories,
Absolutely.
really intertwined with the politics and the social forces of their time.
And the King James Bible is a perfect example.
Now let's talk about another important figure
Okay.
in James's court, his wife, Anna of Denmark,
Yes.
a character who's often been misrepresented, I think.
Yes, she has.
Either as a frivolous airhead
Right.
or a scheming, subversive feminist.
Yes.
Professor Doran offers a much more nuanced view
He does.
of Anna.
She argues that Anna was a skilled queen consort
Okay.
who really understood her role.
So she wasn't just flitting around the court obsessed with fashion and jewels.
No, not at all. She was a shrewd political player in her own right,
Oh,
navigating the court with intelligence and grace.
so a much more influential figure
Yes.
than some accounts give her credit for.
Yes, and her relationship with James was also far more complex than we often think.
Right.
They faced difficulties in Scotland, particularly around the upbringing of their son Henry.
So some power struggles.
There were, but their relationship seemingly improved after the move to England.
Okay.
However, Professor Doran hints that things might have become strained later in the reign.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Well, it's speculated that James developed a close relationship with Robert Carr,
Okay.
a young nobleman
Right.
who rose to prominence at court. Rumors of a romantic relationship between them,
Well-
which might have caused distress to Anna
Yeah.
and potentially created a rift.
Fascinating how even royal marriages,
Yes.
with all their political implications,
Right.
aren't immune to the complexities
They were not.
of human relationships.
It adds another layer of intrigue to this already fascinating dynamic.
So speaking of the court, how did court life change under James compared to Elizabeth?
Well, there were some significant changes
Okay.
and some surprising continuities.
Right.
One striking change was the more peripatetic nature
Okay.
of the court under James.
Peripatetic meaning.
Constantly on the move.
Right. Okay.
He was an avid hunter, often traveled with a smaller court,
Okay.
mainly composed of Scottish companions.
Right. A stark contrast to Elizabeth's more centralized and meticulously orchestrated court.
It was
So no more grand processions.
not entirely.
Okay.
While James enjoyed the freedom of movement, there was still a larger court based in London,
Okay.
often centered around Anna.
Right.
She maintained a separate sphere of influence,
Okay.
hosting her own events,
Right.
patronizing the arts.
So you've got multiple courts operating
Yes.
simultaneously.
Yes, and it reflects these different personalities
Right.
and priorities. You know, Elizabeth, known for her carefully crafted image,
Yeah.
using the court as a stage for power.
Right.
James, more informal, enjoyed that freedom of movement.
This peripatetic court must have had financial implications as well.
Yes, all that traveling was expensive.
Right. And wasn't James known for his extravagant spending habits?
He was. He had a real penchant for luxury
Okay.
and wasn't shy about spending money on jewel slows, entertainment, lavish gifts.
And this created tension with Parliament.
Yes, it did. Parliament resented this profligacy,
Yeah.
especially because he inherited this already creaky financial system from Elizabeth.
Right. The war with Spain had drained the treasury,
Yes,
and Elizabeth's failure to reform the tax system
exactly.
meant that the monarchy was chronically short of funds.
Yes, trying to maintain this lavish lifestyle on a shoestring budget.
And his generosity to his Scottish favorites didn't help.
It really didn't. The English resented seeing their money,
Right.
used to enrich these foreigners.
Yeah. And this financial tension further fueled that idea of a united Great Britain,
Yes, his dream of merging England and
a
Scotland.
vision that did not sit well
It did not.
with the English Parliament.
They saw Scotland as this poor and troublesome neighbor,
Yeah.
not keen on sharing English resources.
Right. Sense of national pride, fear of being overwhelmed
Yeah,
by their northern neighbors.
exactly.
So James's pursuit of union,
Faced considerable resistance.
it did.
Yeah.
And I mean, it is important to note that the English Parliament had legitimate concerns.
Absolutely.
Two different legal systems,
Yes.
religious establishments.
Different cultural identities.
Yeah, merging them would have been incredibly complex and disruptive.
It would have been.
It seems his desire for a united kingdom, although perhaps well-intentioned, created more friction
It did.
than unity.
Yes.
And his lavish spending.
Added fuel to the fire.
It's fascinating how all these seemingly separate issues,
Yes.
religious tensions, financial mismanagement, the pursuit of union, and this courtly extravagance,
Yeah.
all intersect
They do.
to create this really volatile political climate.
Yes, it's a very volatile time.
Welcome back to our deep dive into James I's England. We've seen how he dealt with religious tensions, struggled with finances, and pursued his vision of a united Britain,
Yes.
all while keeping up this lavish court.
And as Professor Dorn points out, this all had a huge impact on the culture.
Right, so let's talk culture.
Yeah.
What were some of the key features of the Jacobean court? We've already said it was much more peripatetic than Elizabeth's.
Yeah. One really big change was the influence of continental trends,
Okay.
particularly from Italy.
Right.
Anna of Denmark, loved Italian art and music.
Yeah.
She played a big role in that.
So this influx of Italian influence in architecture, music, even fashion.
Yes, you see it everywhere. Think of those elaborate masks,
Yeah.
the theatrical performances with the costumes and
Mhm.
allegorical themes, often with Italian elements.
And the Italian musicians at court.
Exactly. It was a really vibrant time.
So James's court was this melting pot,
Yes.
a real departure from Elizabeth's later years.
Yeah. And it's interesting because all of this is happening
Yeah.
against a backdrop of financial instability.
Right. James was basically broke, wasn't he?
Yes. That's one of the big paradoxes of his reign.
Right.
This flourishing of culture and cosmopolitanism,
Uh-huh.
but also this growing financial crisis.
Causing tension.
Yeah, between the king and parliament.
So he was trying to have it both ways.
It seems so. Indulging his expensive tastes,
Right.
but also struggling to keep the kingdom afloat.
And that caused resentment.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
The English people felt their taxes were funding James's lifestyle.
Right. And enriching his favorites.
Exactly. They felt completely out of touch.
And this just fueled the political conflicts,
Absolutely. Economics, politics, culture, it was all intertwined.
creating this unstable environment.
Yeah, and James's inability or unwillingness to address these issues
Yeah.
had lasting consequences,
Leading to.
paving the way for all the upheaval of the 17th century.
It's amazing how something seemingly small, like a king's spending habits
Right.
or his taste in music, can have these massive effects.
It really shows that history isn't just dates and battles,
Yeah.
but it's about personalities, ideologies, economic forces.
Right. So what are some key takeaways from our look at the transition from Tudor to Stuart?
Well, first, this transition was far from smooth.
Right.
James inherited a nation with lots of problems,
Mm.
and his actions often made things worse.
His spending, his belief in his divine right, and the pursuit of a united kingdom.
Yes, it alienated Parliament.
And really set the stage for future conflicts.
It did. His reign was a pivotal turning point,
A bridge between Elizabethan stability and the turmoil of the 17th century.
a bridge between two eras.
Well, this has given us a much richer understanding of this period
I hope so.
and the forces that shaped it.
Me too.
If you're interested in going deeper, Professor Susan Doran's book, From Tudor to Stuart is a great place to start.
It's a fantastic resource.
It's a journey through a really pivotal time.
Yeah.
That shows us the complexities of power ambition.
And the human condition.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into history.
It's been a pleasure.